I said, get her out of here. She doesn't belong in this courtroom. The words slice through the courtroom like a blade. Chairs scrape. Papers scatter. A white court officer lunges forward, grabbing the young black woman by the arm. Rough, unrestrained, deliberate. She jerks back, her voice cracking. I'm not resisting. But the grip tightens. Gasps ripple across the benches. The echo of his boots drowns out her words. He yanks her toward the door, her heels dragging against the marble. Every step becomes an accusation. Every pull, a reminder of who holds power here. No one speaks. Not the clerk, not the bailiff, not the judge who watches in silence. The officer shouts again, louder, as if volume justifies violence. I said out! She stumbles, clutching her folder, its papers flying like desperate confessions, each page marked justice. And still, no one moves. She looks at the crowd, faces blurred in disbelief, hoping someone, anyone, will stand. But they don't. They just watch as she's dragged across the floor, the sound of authority crushing dignity. And in that moment, she realizes silence is the courtroom's loudest verdict. She opens her mouth to speak, but before the words can leave her lips, something slips from her pocket. Her judge's ID hits the floor. A sharp crack against the marble. It spins once, then settles, face up. Her name clear, her title unmistakable. For a second, the room freezes. The officer's hand falters. The crowd stares, caught between confusion and guilt. She is not a defendant, not an intruder. She's Judge Danielle Ross, dragged from her own courtroom. The irony burns through her chest. Pick it up, she whispers, voice trembling. You dropped the truth. But the officer doesn't. He looks away, pretending he didn't see it. Pretending she's no one. The silence tightens again, heavy, suffocating. And though the ID lies there like a mirror reflecting their prejudice, not one person dares to touch it. Injustice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just watches and waits. And as she's pulled toward the exit, she realizes that in this room, authority doesn't fall, it's thrown down. She can feel their eyes, jurors, lawyers, spectators, each gaze a sentence of its own. Some look away in shame. Others stare with quiet approval, as if to say, this is how it's always been. Her pulse hammers against her ribs. The humiliation is electric, alive, crawling up her spine. She wants to scream, to demand justice, to remind them who she is. But the words catch, trapped behind rage and disbelief. The courtroom, once her kingdom, now feels like a cage. A woman coughs. A man whispers. The sound of indifference cuts deeper than any insult. And as they drag her past the bench, past the seal of the state, she wonders how many others have fallen silent in this same room. The answer, she knows, is too many. The door slams shut. The echo ricochets through the corridor like a gunshot. She crashes onto the cold tile, pain slicing up her arm. For a moment, the world blurs. The shouting fades. Only the sound of her breathing remains, ragged, broken, real. Her ID lies beside her, the same one that proved she belonged. She reaches for it, her fingers trembling, clutching it tight against her chest. It feels heavier now, not because of what it says, but because of what it means. Judge Danielle Ross, it reads. Judge, the title they refused to see. The proof they chose to ignore. She stares at the courtroom door. That slab of oak now towering like a wall between truth and perception. And in that hollow silence, something changes inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who's ever been dragged, dismissed, or silenced for daring to exist where they were told they didn't belong. And though her body aches, her resolve sharpens. The echo of that door isn't an ending. It's the beginning. She sits on the cold floor, back against the wall, shaking. Tears mix with fury, tracing paths across her face. Every breath feels like fire, every heartbeat a reminder of her power stripped away. But beneath the exhaustion, defiance stirs. This is what they wanted, she thinks, for me to break. But she doesn't. Not yet. Her eyes stay fixed on that courtroom door. The same one that shut her out. The same one she will one day walk through again on her own terms. Her voice, barely audible, cracks through the silence. They'll remember this. The words hang there, fragile, yet unshakable. And in that stillness, the corridor feels less like a place of defeat, and more like the birthplace of a reckoning, Her whisper slices through the air, calm, steady, final. You'll regret this. Not a threat. A prophecy. A promise forged in humiliation and lit by righteous fury. Because the same system that dragged her out will one day have to stand before her. And when that day comes, the verdict will sound very different. Her breathing slows. Her hand tightens around her ID. The pain fades, replaced by something colder. Determination. The silence no longer feels heavy. It feels sacred, a storm building quietly behind the walls. And as the screen fades to black, her voice echoes one last time. Low, unwavering, unstoppable. This isn't over. The marble still hums with echoes of the chaos. A name card lies shattered near the door. Danielle Rivers. Not a criminal. Not a defendant. She was the youngest federal judge nominee in her state. A Harvard law graduate who wore her integrity like a second skin. They didn't see that when they dragged her. They saw color before credentials, anger before intellect, defiance where there was only dignity. Her voice, once commanding, now trembles in her head, replaying each second like evidence she can't dismiss. This is how racism hides in plain sight, not in slurs but in assumptions. The same people who once applauded her rise now turned away from her fall. And as she sits outside that courtroom, breathing in the sting of injustice, her name, Danielle Rivers, suddenly feels less like an identity and more like a challenge. A challenge to prove that this story isn't about a victim. It's about a reckoning that's just beginning. Long before the title, before the degrees, before the courtroom, there was a little girl sitting on a metal bench, waiting for a father who never came home. Wrongfully imprisoned, another name lost in the system's shuffle. Her grandmother would say, "Baby, the law doesn't see folks like us, but maybe one day you'll make it look again." That promise burned inside her. Their neighborhood was the kind of place where police sirens were lullabies and justice was a rumor. She learned early. The rules were written by people who never had to live under them. But she studied them anyway, not to obey, but to change them. Because deep down, she knew, to fight a system built to break you, you have to learn its language first. And she did. It was a night like any other. A flickering streetlight. A boy no older than her brother, face pressed against a police car. Danielle watched from the sidewalk, fists clenched, powerless. He hadn't done anything. She knew it. Everyone knew it. But in their world, truth didn't matter. Authority did. The red and blue lights painted the asphalt like a warning, and under that sickly orange glow, she whispered to herself, "Never again." That night, a promise was born. Not whispered to God, but to the world that refused to see her kind as human. She would become the voice they tried to silence, the one who turned pain into precedent. The streetlight flickered once more, saw like it was listening. Years later, that girl wore tailored suits and quiet power. But the world still tested her. Every meeting began with a double take. Every courtroom with a raised eyebrow. "You're the attorney?" they'd ask, as if intelligence had a color code. Danielle learned to smile. That steady, practiced calm that said, "I see what you did, but I won't give you the satisfaction." Microaggressions became her daily background noise. She didn't shout. She didn't break. She let her work speak, and it spoke louder than any insult ever could. But inside, she kept count. Every dismissal, every doubt, every "you're so articulate" that felt more like a reminder of their surprise. And each one built her armor, layer by layer, for the battle she didn't yet know was coming. That morning, before the courtroom erupted, her phone buzzed. A voicemail, distorted, untraceable. A low voice whispering, "They'll never let someone like you sit there." She had deleted it. Told herself it was just hate, just noise. But now those words echo louder than the gavel ever did. Someone like you, the phrase gnaws at her. Not because it's new, but because it's familiar. She's heard it her whole life, dressed in different words, spoken by different mouths. And now, as she stares at the same door that threw her out, she knows the voice was right about one thing. They didn't want her sitting there. But they'd have to watch her rise anyway, because this story, her story, was far from over. "Morning, Miss Rivers," he said, dragging that word out like it was an insult. Officer Brent Calloway stood by the metal detector, his badge gleaming, his grin tighter than his jaw. Danielle paused. "It's Judge Rivers." Her tone was calm, precise, the kind of correction that didn't beg for respect. It demanded it. He raised an eyebrow, pretending not to hear. "Right, Miss Rivers. Orientation's this way." The clerks nearby shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between them but saying nothing. The silence said enough. She followed. Heels echoing down the hallway, every click a reminder of how many times she'd walked into rooms she had to earn her place in. But this time was different. This was her courthouse. Or so she thought. When she reached the courtroom doors, Calloway turned slightly, his voice soft but sharp. "Don't take it personally. Folks here just aren't used to change." Danielle smiled, the kind that hides fire behind glass. "Then they'd better get used to it." He chuckled under his breath. "We'll see about that." And for a brief second she saw it, the smirk that told her this was just the beginning. "Need to see that ID again," Calloway said, hand outstretched like he was doing her a favor. Danielle frowned. "You just verified it." "Protocol," he replied too quickly. "We double-check everyone knew." Everyone watched. The receptionist pretending to type, the bailiff sipping coffee that had already gone cold. Danielle handed him the ID, her patience measured. "Is that so? Then you must be very busy this week." Calloway scanned it slowly, his thumb hovering over her photo a beat too long. "Harvard Law, huh? Fancy. Guess the system's really changing." His tone carried no admiration, only disbelief dressed as small talk. When he finally handed it back, his smirk never faded. "You can't be too careful, right?" Danielle forced a nod, though her pulse thudded in her ears. "You're right. You can't." But what she didn't say was louder, that this protocol wasn't about safety. It was about power, about reminding her where she stood in a place that didn't think she belonged. And as she walked away, she knew this wasn't scrutiny. It was sabotage, disguised as procedure. Danielle reached for the lounge door when his arm shot out, blocking her path. "This room's for staff only," Calloway said, voice low, eyes steady. She blinked. "I am staff." He leaned in, almost amused. "Not in this room." Her breath caught, not because of the words, but the way he said them. She looked at the engraved plaque on the door, Judge's Lounge, and then back at him. "You might want to read that again?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe it's broken. You know, like everything else around here lately." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Excuse me." He didn't move. "Not right away." Then, with a mocking grin, he stepped aside. "Don't say I didn't warn you, Miss Rivers." She walked past him, spine straight, steps deliberate. But inside, something cracked. Not fear, not yet, just the quiet understanding that what she faced wasn't hate in the open. It was racism whispered behind uniforms and policy manuals. By noon, the whispers had grown roots. Diversity hire. Quota judge. Fast-tracked for the optics. Words that traveled faster than truth ever could. Danielle caught a glance from a senior judge, his lips curving in polite dismissal. "We're so glad to have an inclusion candidate like you here," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Her smile didn't falter. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'll make sure I'm included in the next major ruling then." A few laughed, not because it was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. Behind every handshake, behind every compliment, there was that same undertone, the kind that stripped her of her title without ever saying it out loud. And for the first time, she wondered if their smiles were masks. Masks that would crack the moment she stood her ground. The halls were empty when she found it. Her nameplate, scratched, gouged, the words twisted into a message carved deep. "Not in our court." Danielle's fingers brushed over the jagged letters. The message wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was deliberate, personal. Her reflection in the polished wall stared back, proud, composed, but trembling just enough to betray the pain. She whispered to herself, "So this is how they fight progress, with keys and cowardice." The sting burned, not because they hated her, but because they feared her. And fear, she knew, was the first sign of change. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was waiting just beyond that hallway. HR's response came in a monotone. "We'll look into it. No apology. No urgency. Just the kind of empty reassurance that says, we won't." Danielle gathered her things, the silence of the office pressing against her chest. As she neared the exit, she heard them. 2 officers, voices hushed but careless. "Tomorrow's gonna be fun," one said. "Yeah," the other laughed. "Can't wait to see how she handles that." Her breath stopped mid-step. They didn't see her. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, the message was clear. Whatever came next wasn't over. It was planned. And as she stepped into the night air, her gut twisted with the kind of instinct that never lies. Tomorrow would test more than her patience. It would test her power, and she had no idea just how far they were willing to go. "Ma'am, this courtroom's closed to the public." The words hit harder than the gavel ever could. Danielle froze mid-step, clutching her case file, eyes locked on Officer Calloway standing squarely in front of her courtroom door. Her courtroom. "Excuse me?" she asked, voice measured but sharp. He tilted his head, feigning confusion. "You heard me. No unauthorized persons beyond this point." She stared at him, disbelief flooding in. "I'm presiding over this case." He smirked, leaning closer. "Then I'll need to see proof of that." Law clerks turned. Whispers spread like wildfire, curious, entertained, but no one stepped in. Danielle inhaled slowly, every muscle tight. "You know exactly who I am," he shrugged. "All I know is the procedure." The silence thickened. Then, with exaggerated slowness, he gestured to the sign on the door. "Court in session." "Can't let just anyone walk in there." Her hands trembled around the file, fury burning behind her calm. "I am Judge Danielle Rivers," he grinned. "Not today, you're not." The sting wasn't just in his words. It was in the laughter from the back of the room, the kind that cuts deeper than insults. And in that moment, Danielle realized this wasn't about protocol. It was about putting her back in her place. But she refused to move, not yet. Because she knew walking away would mean he'd already won. "I'm the new judge assigned to this courtroom," Danielle said, lifting her ID for all to see. Her voice didn't shake, but her hand did, just slightly. Calloway's smirk deepened. "That right?" He didn't even look at the badge, just swatted it aside like an inconvenience. A hush fell over the courtroom entrance. Someone in the back muttered, "She's the judge," disbelief dripping from every word. Danielle straightened, her tone steady. "You've already verified my credentials." Calloway folded his arms. "Then you won't mind waiting outside while I confirm again." Her jaw clenched. "You're obstructing a sitting judge." He laughed, low and mocking. "No, ma'am. I'm protecting the integrity of this court." A few onlookers nodded, eager to align with authority. Others turned away, uncomfortable, silent. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a performance, and she was the target. Danielle took a step forward. "If you continue this, officer, you'll answer for it." His grin widened. "You really think anyone's gonna take your word over mine?" That line hit harder than the shove that came next, invisible, but felt in every stare. She could feel the story twisting already. The angry black judge, the unprofessional scene. And all she could think was how fast justice can turn on the one who's meant to protect it. It happened before she could blink. Calloway's hand clamped around her arm, firm, deliberate. "I said step out." The gasp from the crowd sliced the silence. "Take your hands off me," Danielle demanded, but her words were swallowed by the murmurs and the rising sound of phones unlocking. Click, flash, record. Every second was captured, dissected, consumed. "Officer Calloway!" a clerk shouted, but no one stopped him. He pulled her toward the door, grip unyielding. "You're disturbing proceedings. I am the proceedings," she shouted, yanking against his hold. Her mentor, Judge Harlan, stood near the bench, eyes lowered, unmoving. The same man who'd once told her, "You'll change this place." Now he couldn't even look at her. Calloway shoved the door open, dragging her into the corridor as the crowd erupted. Some laughed, some whispered, others filmed, feeding on her humiliation. Her robe slipped from her shoulder, her voice breaking through the noise. "You're assaulting an officer of the court." Calloway didn't flinch. "All I see is a disruption being removed." Her pulse pounded. Fear mixed with rage. She caught one last glimpse of the courtroom, of her mentor turning his back. And for the first time, Danielle understood betrayal not as a word, but as a silence that echoed louder than any scream. "Let me go!" Danielle's voice cracked, echoing down the corridor. He released her arm, smirking as if she were entertainment. "You're disturbing court proceedings, ma'am." Her breath came hard. "You know exactly who I am." He straightened his badge. "All I know is that you're making a scene." She stared at him. The audacity, the calm cruelty. "You will regret this." His smile turned cold. "We'll see." Behind her, the courtroom door slammed shut. Sharp, final. The sound felt like a verdict, one rendered without a jury. Danielle stood in that empty hallway, dignity crumbling in pieces. Her robe lay half on the floor, her hand shaking as she bent to pick it up. And as she did, she caught her reflection in the brass panel, strong, furious, human. She whispered to herself, "They want to break me." But her voice wavered, the defiance nearly lost under the weight of humiliation. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't over. They weren't done, not by a long shot. The video hit social media before she even reached her office. "Black judge dragged out of her own courtroom," one caption read. "Disruptive woman detained," said another. Two versions of the same truth, one fed by racism, the other by rage. By noon, it was everywhere. TikTok edits, news clips, podcasts debating the full story. Her humiliation had gone viral. Laughter under one post, prayers under another, and silence from the courthouse. Not a statement. Not a single defense. The same people who'd seen it happen carried on as though nothing had occurred. Danielle scrolled through the comments, each one cutting deeper. Maybe she deserved it. She played the race card too fast. Her heart ached, not just for herself, but for every person who had lived this story before. She leaned back, eyes stinging. Somewhere between outrage and exhaustion, she whispered, "They'll move on by tomorrow." But she was wrong. Tomorrow wasn't forgiveness. Tomorrow was reckoning. Her office was dark when the phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated. After today, trust wasn't something she had left. The ringing grew louder, sharper. Finally, she answered, "Judge Rivers." A pause. Then a voice, calm and unfamiliar. "You don't know me," the caller said, "but I saw what they did to you." Danielle's throat tightened. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been there. Someone who knows how they bury the truth." Her heart pounded. "What do you want?" The voice lowered. "To help you. But you'll need to move fast. They're already rewriting the report." Danielle froze. "Rewriting?" "Yes, and by morning the footage inside that courtroom will disappear." Silence filled the room. Heavy, dangerous, real. The caller's final words sent chills down her spine. "If you want justice, Judge Rivers, you'll have to fight the system from the outside." Then the line went dead. And for the first time that day, she realized the real war was only beginning. "Judge Rivers?" The voice on the other end was brisk, commanding, and the kind that carried weight. "Yes," Danielle replied, her tone guarded. "This is Karen Wells, Chief of Staff to the Governor. We've seen the footage." Danielle's heart skipped. For the first time since that nightmare, someone said we've seen, not will investigate. Karen continued, sharp and deliberate. "The governor is furious. He wants this corrected, immediately." Danielle exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, No need to explain, Judge. The video speaks for itself. You were assaulted in your own courtroom. That's not going to stand." Danielle's eyes welled, but she held her voice steady. "I appreciate that." Karen's tone softened slightly. "We'll make it right. Expect a call in 10 minutes. You're not alone in this anymore." The line clicked off, leaving Danielle in stunned silence. For once, the system that had ignored her pain was shaking on her behalf. Justice, or not mercy, was coming. And this time it had her name on it. 10 minutes later, the courthouse phones began ringing. Orders, direct, unquestionable. Effective immediately, the voice of the governor thundered through the chain of command. Escort Judge Danielle Rivers to her assigned courtroom. Treat her with full honors. The word spread faster than gossip ever could. Danielle sat frozen, disbelief clashing with relief. Down the hall, Officer Calloway's posture stiffened as the directive echoed from the intercom. Escort Judge Rivers to her bench. He looked around, confusion creeping into his arrogance. "What's this about?" someone whispered. Calloway's jaw tightened. Probably a misunderstanding. But even he didn't believe it. Footsteps approached. 2 senior marshals entered, polite, professional, and unmistakably respectful. "Judge Rivers," one said firmly, "we're here to escort you back." She rose, composed, her voice even. "Let's proceed." As she walked past Calloway, she didn't glance his way. She didn't have to. He already knew. The shift had begun. The hallway that once felt like exile now carried the rhythm of authority. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, reclaiming space she'd been forced to surrender. Flashes went off again, but this time the tone was different. Admiration, apology, awe. Reporters whispered, "That's her, the judge from the video." And beside her walked the Attorney General, a silent symbol that the state itself was now watching. Danielle didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every face she passed seemed to carry a question. How did she come back so fast? But inside, she wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about power, how fragile, how easily stolen, how hard-won when you refuse to bow. By the time they reached courtroom 6B, the whispers had become a murmur of disbelief. Danielle paused at the door. "This is where they dragged me out," she said softly. The Attorney General met her eyes. "Then it's where you walk back in." And she did, unshaken, unstoppable. The doors opened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Every head turned. The same crowd that had filmed her humiliation now stood motionless, phones forgotten. The once mocking clerk straightened instantly. Even Judge Harlan, the mentor who'd looked away, rose to his feet, shame written across his face. And at the far end of the room, Officer Calloway froze. For the first time, he looked small, his confidence cracking under the weight of collective judgment. Danielle's gaze found him unwavering. He flinched. Not because she spoke, but because she didn't have to. Silence became her weapon, and it cut deeper than any accusation could. Someone whispered, "That's her." The real judge. And suddenly the air in the courtroom shifted. Respect, fear, accountability. The scales had started to tilt, finally in her favor. But she knew this wasn't the end of it. It was just the opening statement. Danielle stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Her robe, the same one that had fallen in shame days ago, lay folded on the bench. She lifted it, hands steady now, and placed it over her shoulders. The room was silent enough to hear her heartbeat. She sat, posture regal, eyes locked on Calloway. "It's Judge Rivers," she said clearly, her voice echoing with power reclaimed. "You may step back, officer." He hesitated, face pale, words caught in his throat. The Attorney General turned to him. "You heard her?" Calloway stepped back, the sound of his retreat louder than any protest. Danielle picked up the gavel, the very symbol they tried to deny her. With one measured strike, the sound thundered through the room. "Court," she said, voice calm but commanding, "is now in session." Every eye stayed on her, not out of curiosity but out of reverence. For the first time, justice looked like her, and though she appeared unshaken, her mind whispered one truth beneath the composure. They'll try again. But next time, I'll be ready. "Officer Calloway, step forward." The courtroom froze. Danielle's tone carried no rage, just authority sharpened by truth. He hesitated, eyes darting toward the Attorney General as if waiting for a rescue that wouldn't come. Danielle continued, voice steady. "You violated judicial protocol, assaulted a presiding judge, and acted under bias unbecoming of your uniform." He swallowed hard. "Ma'am, Judge Rivers," she corrected. The correction was cut clean. Silence rippled through the room. She leaned forward, unflinching. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending formal investigation. The same officers who once stood behind him now stepped beside him, but not as allies. Calloway's lips trembled, pride breaking faster than his excuses. He turned toward her one last time, eyes pleading for mercy. Danielle didn't look away. "You taught me something," she said softly. "When power is abused, silence becomes complicity." As he was escorted out, every spectator knew justice had just walked back into the room. The next morning, Judge Harlan's resignation letter spread like wildfire. No speech, no explanation. Just 2 words handwritten at the bottom. "I failed." Danielle sat alone in chambers, reading it once, then setting it aside. There was no satisfaction in his fall, only truth finding its own gravity. For years, she'd looked up to him, believing integrity was instinct. Now she understood it was a choice. Her reflection in the window met her gaze, calm, unshaken, resolute. The world was finally catching up to what she'd always known. Justice doesn't whisper. It stares you down until you can't look away, and she was done looking away. By afternoon, her name had crossed every screen in America. Clips of her reinstatement flooded social media. News anchors called it a defining moment in the fight against racism and discrimination in public institutions. Talk shows debated it. Students quoted it. Hashtags like "Justice for Rivers" trended in every city. But for Danielle, it wasn't fame, it was vindication. She scrolled through the comments, reading strangers' words. She stood for all of us. Each one hit deeper than applause ever could. She thought about the people who never got their footage, their proof, their second chance. And in that moment, she knew her story wasn't an ending. It was an opening statement for something much bigger. The world had seen her fall. Now they'd witness her rise. Weeks later, Danielle stood before the State Ethics Committee, not as a plaintiff, but as a reformer. Her proposal was simple: mandatory bias and accountability training for every officer and public servant. "This isn't revenge," she said. "It's repaired." The room fell silent, not from fear, but respect. She'd turned her scars into legislation, her humiliation into a blueprint for justice. Every question thrown her way, she met with calm clarity. By the time the hearing adjourned, even her harshest critics stood to applaud. It wasn't just her victory anymore. It was a movement taking its first breath, and she wasn't done breathing life into it. Her voice played over the final montage, steady, warm, reflective. "They dragged me out thinking they could silence me. But sometimes the floor you fall on is the one you rise from." The echo lingered like a heartbeat, because this wasn't about a courtroom anymore. It was about every woman, every person of color who'd been told to sit down and stay quiet. Danielle hadn't just stood back up. She made sure the world was still standing with her, and somewhere, in the quiet that followed, justice finally exhaled. "Justice isn't given." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but the weight behind it filled the empty courtroom. Danielle sat where it all began, the same chair, the same walls that once echoed her humiliation. Only now they echoed her resolve. She looked at the gavel resting before her, fingers tracing the edge as if feeling every scar that led her here. "They took my title, my dignity. For a moment, even my voice," she murmured, "but not my truth." Her reflection in the polished wood met her eyes, calm, strong, unbreakable. "Justice isn't given," she repeated, firmer this time. "It's claimed, and I claimed mine." Outside, the hum of the courthouse continued, but for the first time, it felt like hers. Still, beneath her victory, a question lingered, one that demanded to be asked. Her gaze lifted, steady, piercing, unblinking. "If you saw me being dragged out," she said slowly, directly, "would you have stayed silent? Or spoken up?" Her voice didn't accuse. It invited. It wasn't just to the people in the room. It was to the world beyond the screen. The kind of question that sits heavy in your chest long after the sound fades. "Because silence," she added softly, "has never been neutral." She let the words hang, daring anyone listening to pretend they didn't feel them. Then, without another word, she turned away. A quiet piano melody began to rise, low, haunting, pure. The sound of breath, of stillness, of truth reclaiming space. Then, as the world held its breath, the words appeared against the dark, inspired by true events of racial injustice in the U.S. legal system. One line, enough to remind everyone watching. For some, this story isn't fiction. It's their everyday fight for dignity, and somewhere another Danielle is still waiting to be heard.